What is going on, everybody? I am Hoops and Hip Hop, and welcome to another episode of the Pokéblock podcast. This has been kind of an interesting week, to say the least, if you know what I mean. Not just in Pokemon, but for life in general. But today's episode is going to be pretty fun because, once again, just like last week, we don't really have anything in the way of like current events or news or like the DLC that's coming out. We don't have any more details on that, so we really don't have any new juicy information to latch onto that we can really go into and discuss like I tend to like to do here. And so, as I said last week, in these kinds of weeks, I'm just going to be doing sort of like video type of content that I would do on my normal channel, just stuff that I haven't done on my channel, or I'm not going to do on my channel, and instead I'm going to reserve for here because I can kind of talk about it in a more extended format. And that is what we're going to be doing today, and today's subject is an interesting one, and that is ranking all of the Pokemon regions, the main series ones, from worst to best. Now, I have done something like similar to this. I believe I talked about like all the regions' Pokemon and ranked them from worst to best, but if I remember correctly, I have never actually ranked the regions themselves, and if I have, it was a while ago, and it definitely did not include Galar, because it would have been before Pokemon Sword and Shield were even out. So with all of that being said, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and rank the regions. Before we get started, though, I do want to basically give a couple disclaimers. Number one, there aren't any regions I hate. I have things that I love about all of the regions, so even the ones that end up on the lower end of the list, I still love them. They're still great, but I will obviously talk about what puts them at the lower points on the list, and then I'm going to consider basically all facets of the region itself, which includes obviously the region, like the geography of it, the overall look and feel of it, the theme of it, obviously the Pokemon, the locations, how the player kind of like flows through the region and how that operates, and overall just kind of my general thoughts. This isn't going to be like a commentary on the games as a whole, because obviously there's a lot more to it. It's strictly kind of just the region and its immediate like features or what it offers, which is why we're including the Pokemon. So that is what we're doing. Before we get into that, though, I do need to thank the sponsors of the UCast Studios podcast, particularly the Pokéblock podcast right here, because they really make a difference. They help us do what we do here, and it means the world. So with that being said, today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Tax season is here, and that means it's time to file your taxes. Instead of going through the basic of walking into an H&R Block, though, you can call all of the experts over at the Tax Defense Group, which is going to be way more convenient and way less of a hassle. They can handle your tax filing anywhere as long as you're online. And for a limited time, if you're a W-2 employee, you can save half off of your filing. All you have to do is call the Tax Defense Group before April 15th, 2020 and mention that you heard this ad on UCast Studios. Go ahead and call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973. That number again is 800-850-7973, or you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Junkie. There are millions of good paying jobs out there, and what might be holding you back from getting one of them is having an up-to-date, well-written resume. Junkie offers a resume writing service for the low cost of just $145 with only a 3-day turnaround. You can't beat that price and delivery time, gotta be honest. So go ahead and call Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online as well at writerjunkie.com. Mention that you heard this ad on UCast Studios, and they will go ahead and get right to work. Alright, so with that being said, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some ranking of some Pokemon regions. So first off, we're going to start on the low end, obviously, and go towards the top, and at number 8 is actually the Lola Region, which is honestly kind of surprising for me personally, just because I've always had another specific region at the bottom for the longest time, and we will get into that later once we get to it, but I decided to go ahead and put a Lola at the bottom just because I'm not a huge fan of tropical regions. I'm like that type of theme has never been huge for me. It's never been my favorite. And so that kind of just naturally makes Alola a little, like, lower on the ranking, a little lower on the rungs of the ladder, if you will, for me personally, just because of that right out of the gate. Secondly, I'm not really a huge fan of how you progress through the Alola region. Obviously, it's made up of islands, and you basically are island hopping throughout the game, which, in a sense, kind of sucks because obviously the Alola region that makes it very broken up, and basically you don't get that contingent free-flowing type of travel like you do with other regions. But I also believe that's due to the fact of the way that the game has you traveling from region to region, because the game Pokemon Sun and Moon are very, very linear. The islands are very, very linear. You essentially go in a circle on each of the islands, and then when you get back to the point that you started at, you go to the next one, and there is also no traveling in between. I personally think that if they offered travel in between the islands where you got to do like a mini game, or if they even made it a route, like even if it was like obviously the islands are a good distance away from each other, but obviously I feel like they could adjust that in the game to where even if it was a longer route, they could have still made a route between the islands that you actually got to travel to. You obviously could have some trainers that you could have battled. Maybe there could be some awesome, like, cool, like, side stuff going on in some of the routes, like the abandoned ship, for instance, something like that from Hoenn. But no, they didn't have any of that. It was just kind of like they took you straight from island to island, and then you went in that circle, and then you were done. And so that, combined with just me not liking the tropical stuff in general, really takes it, like, really brings it down a few rungs. And then I think the final thing, the final cherry on top, or not the cherry on top, because this is the final thing that really just makes it like my least favorite, is the Pokemon. The Pokemon, first off, let me say, there are a ton of really great Pokemon in Alola. You've got the whole Rowlet family, you've got Cosmog, you've got Rockruff, you've got Solgaleo and Lunala, you've got Komala, you've got a lot of really, really good Pokemon. But there are some that are kind of just like, you're just like, yeah, that's not my favorite. I've always said I'm not a fan of Incineroar, I'm not a fan of Primarina, so that's 2/3 of the starters that I just, I'm not really into. I'm not really into Sandygast or Palossand, or more so Palossand than Sandygast, but I'm not really a Palossand fan. I really, really do not like Crabominable. I think it's Crabomination, if you will. So there are just enough Pokemon that I'm just not a fan of in Alola as well for me to be like, yeah, I think that's got to count against you. So for all of those reasons, yeah, Alola number 8. And then coming in at number 7 is the region that I originally had at the lowest, but I've been thinking about it, and it's actually warmed up to me a lot recently, and that would be the Unova region. Now, if you have followed my personal YouTube channel for a while, and have just kind of like followed what I do, I have mentioned several times that Unova Gen 5 is my least favorite generation. And I still stick by that. Like, Gen 5 is still my least favorite generation, but there are a lot of things that I've been thinking about recently that I really do like about the Unova region. First off, the climate and the geography and just the overall feel of Unova is definitely much more my vibe as opposed to something like Alola, for instance. And I also really appreciate that it's based on the United States, even if it's nowhere close to where I live in the United States. It's still the United States, so I still kind of have that like home sort of connection with it. Even though I've literally never been to New York City in my life, I still kind of feel that connection. So I do appreciate the United States aspect of it. And also the region itself, the way it's constructed and the way you kind of travel through it, just is perfectly laid out, because basically the way they kind of have you do it in both Black and White and Black and White 2 is where you go to a lot of the towns in the main story, but then when you beat the champion, there are a good maybe 3 to 4 towns that you can go through in the post game that are basically just like new areas to explore, and that kind of stuff when it comes to post-game content is just the absolute best in my opinion. And Unova as a region does it probably better or as good as most, if not all, of the other regions, because it does it really well. In Black and White, you obviously have La Cunosa Town, you have the Village Bridge, you have Undella Town, I believe, is in the post game of Black and White. But then in Black and White 2, you have a lot of the older towns, like you have New Vima Town, you have Accumula Town, you have, I want to even say, Necrene City is there, maybe I think Striaton as well. So there's just a lot of really cool, like, explorable stuff after the fact, which is really, I just really like that a lot. And then Black and White 2 as a game is like, it's not necessarily like, it's not quite like my second favorite Pokemon game of all time, but it's basically up in that second tier of Pokemon games for me, because the way I have them kind of laid out is that Heart Gold and Soul Silver are my favorites, and then I kind of have a three-way tie between Pokemon Sword and Shield, Pokemon X and Y, and Pokemon Black and White 2. And if I had to say, I'd probably say that Black and White 2 is at the top of the list of those three, but as of right now, it's a three-way tie because it's too close for me to want to call at this point. But basically, Black and White 2 is a really dang good game. Like, it is easily one of my favorite Pokemon games, which says a lot considering that Gen 5 is my least favorite generation. The reason why I don't like Generation 5, and the reason why, well, I don't want to say I don't like it, because I like all the Pokemon regions, but the reason why it's my least favorite is because of the Pokemon. The Pokemon are easily the worst designed Pokemon that we've ever had, in my opinion. But with that being said, there are still a lot of really good Pokemon in Generation 5, and that's kind of thanks to just the sheer number of Pokemon that there are in Gen 5, 156, most we've ever had in a single generation. And so you have your duds like Stunfisk and the Timber family and the Clink family, but then you have amazing Pokemon like Braviary, Zoroark, you've got, let's see, you got Whimsicott, you've got Emolga, you've got, the starters are like okay. It's a bit of a mixed bag for me. Serperior isn't bad, but I'm not like the biggest fan of it. Emboar is like decent. I'm like, yeah, you're okay. But I really actually do like Samurott a lot. I know some people really don't like Samurott at all. Like, it seems to be like the majority opinion that people don't like Samurott, but I love Samurott. I think it's great. So the starters are decent. You've got all of those other Pokemon that I just mentioned. So there are Haxorus is another one. Keep bringing up things, but yeah, so there are a lot of really good Pokemon in Unova, even if there are a lot of like sucky ones in my opinion. But then Black and White 2, they bring in more of a variety from the other generations as well, which is something Black and White didn't have. So like, yeah, Unova overall is very volatile in terms of like the good that it does versus the bad that it does, which is why it ends up lower on the list. But I do want to emphasize that there are some things that Unova does really, 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 really well, to the point where Black, White 2 are some of my favorite Pokemon games ever. So, got Unova at number 7. Coming in at number 6, though, we would have the Johto region, and Unova and Kanto were kind of jockeying for position. I almost put Unova at 6, but I decided to go with Kanto. And the reason why I decided to go with Kanto over Unova for this position was because Kanto has better Pokemon overall, in my opinion. And Unova is kind of like it's basically, if you didn't know, Black and White were supposed to be like a soft reboot of Red, Blue, and Yellow and the Generation 1 games. And so there's a lot of Pokemon in Unova that are literally the equivalent or the counterpart to Generation 1 Pokemon. Like, you've got Timber and his family are equivalent to Machop. You've got Woobat and Swoobat being the equivalent to Zubat and Golbat, that type of thing. So you've got a lot of parallels between these two regions, and I just feel like in that department, Kanto does it better. I mean, yeah, you have your classic Geodude, it's just a rock with a face, or Execute, just a pile of eggs. But I kind of feel like, and it might just be the nostalgia or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not going to go into that. But overall, I feel like the bad Pokemon of Kanto are better than the bad Pokemon of Unova. And so that kind of gave Kanto a leg up. And then the other thing that I kind of looked at was the post-game area exploring thing that I talked about with Unova that I really like. That is what almost made me put Unova over the edge into the 6th spot. But Kanto does have the Sevi Islands, and the Sevi Islands are phenomenal. In my opinion, they are probably the second best post-game area ever, next to Kanto in Gold and Silver. So overall, that post-game area is better than the post-game areas and towns of Unova, in my opinion. So that's why I put Kanto above Unova. But overall, just as a region, like Kanto, it's like you can't really give it like the best rating ever, because it's because it's like, it's the first region, and so it's like the most plain of all of them. It doesn't really have the diversity in its geography that a lot of the other regions do. It doesn't really have as many of the bells and whistles. So like, yeah, you can't really blame it for that, because it was the first region. It didn't decide that it was going to be the first region, obviously, but at the same time, you can't discount that sort of thing. And so, like, overall, it's just solid. Like, I can't really say it's amazing, because there's so many other regions that improved on aspects that Kanto established, but it's definitely not bad either. There's a reason why Pokemon is as big as it is today, is because the Kanto region absolutely killed it in Red and Blue and started the craze that we all know and love. So there's a lot of really good things about the Kanto region, especially like Sevi Islands, for instance, in the Fire Red and Leaf Green remakes, and then there's a lot of really other good stuff about the Fire Red and Leaf Green remakes that they do with Kanto as well. They kind of redistribute where the legendary birds are, so Moltres goes to I want to say it's Mount Ember. I think that's right. I haven't played Fire Red and Leaf Green in a long time. So Moltres gets moved from the volcano, and there's just a couple other things that are done that are just fantastic with that. But overall, I feel like 6 is a good spot for the Kanto region. And really quick before we move on to the rest of our rankings, I do want to remind you guys about the Tax Defense Group. If you need your taxes done, you can get a sweet deal on it if you call the Tax Defense Group and mention that you heard the ad on UCast Studios. So just call them at 800-850-7973. Visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. And if you need a banging resume, go hit up Writer Junkie. They can get you all set up. Call them at 805-587-7966. Mention you heard the ad on UCast Studios, and you can also visit them online at writerjunkie.com. Okay, so moving into 5, let's see. We've got Kalos, we've got Sinnoh, we've got Johto, we've got Galar, and we've got Hoenn. And at number 5, I've got the Hoenn region. The reason why I've got Hoenn at number 5 is, first and foremost, if we go back to what we talked about with Alola, I'm not a huge fan of the tropical stuff. So right off the bat, no matter how good Hoenn is, and trust me, it's good, I'm going to get into why I think it's really good, I'm just not a fan of the tropical things. So it kind of just naturally holds it back a little bit. And the reason why I'm not into tropical stuff, that's literally just personal preference. Like, that has nothing to do with Pokemon. Like, it's not like I have a vendetta against the way they do tropical areas in Pokemon. I'm just not like a tropical area type of person. Like, I do not like swimming at all. I will never go swimming unless it's like in a pond or a lake or something like that. And I've just grown up all my life in basically a place that is the opposite of tropical and is more rugged, I guess you could say, and mountainous and things like that. So yeah, tropical locations have never been basically my favorite in terms of the vast variety of geographical locations that there are in the world. So that is a factor. Might sound kind of complicated, but it makes a difference for me. Other than that, though, that's like the only thing I can hold against Hoenn. Like, that is legitimately the only thing I can hold against Hoenn. For me, Generation 3 as a whole, but obviously the Hoenn region and its Pokemon have a big part to play in this, they have always felt to me just like so fresh and new and exciting. And like, they have such a different, everything in the Hoenn region has such a different flavor compared to, like, say, the first two generations in Kanto and Johto. And I almost want to say that's intentional, because if you don't know the story, Generation 2 was originally going to be the last Pokemon generation. They were going to stop it there, but then they realized they had a global phenomenon on their hands, and they were like, we have to keep going. We cannot stop doing Pokemon, because it's literally the most popular thing that's ever existed. So they kept going with Hoenn, and to me, it kind of seems like, because they were originally going to stop the franchise with Gen 2, but Gen 3 was the first generation where they were like, yeah, we're going to keep going. It almost seems like they intentionally decided to, like, drastically shake up, like, the vibe of Pokemon and try something completely new. Because even, like, 15-ish years later, Hoenn still feels really, like, fresh and, like, new and exciting compared to even a lot of the newer regions that came after it as well. It has a really distinct quality about it, a really distinct vibe about it that really makes it feel like unique and fresh and cool all the time, which I really, really love about it. It's one of those things that you can't really manufacture, you can't really write into the script if you're doing something like this, if you're developing a region. It just comes down to the quality and sort of just like the way you put it all together. And Game Freak did a fantastic job of putting it all together. If we get into the Pokemon are all great. I've talked about before on my channel how I think the Hoenn starters are some of the best starters we've ever gotten. You've got so many awesome legendaries. The box art legendaries are incredible. You've got the Regis, which I've said are some of the best, like, they're basically one of the best legendary trios that's out there, with the way you have to go about obtaining them and finding them. And then there's just a million other really good, like, regular Pokemon. Like, you've got Absol, you've got Kecleon, you've got Salamence, you got Metagross. There's just so many really good Pokemon in Hoenn. Like, Hoenn definitely has a lot of really good Pokemon. It's mostly just that tropical theme that holds it back a little bit for me. But other than that, I would say Hoenn is fantastic. Moving on to number 4, though, and this was a really, really hard choice to decide who was going to be number 4 and who was going to squeak their way into the top 3, but ultimately I decided to go with Sinnoh for the number 4 spot. Now, just like I was talking about with Unova, where I've really been warming up to a lot of its aspects recently, I've been doing the same for Sinnoh, but I think even more so. Not that Sinnoh was, like, one of my least favorite regions before, and now it's, like, made its way to the top 4. I feel like it's always kind of been sort of in this middle part of the crop, or the group, if you will, for me, but it's starting to slowly creep its way towards the top, and that's because I've realized that, like, the Pokemon in Sinnoh are just phenomenal. Like, I think Sinnoh as a Pokemon region, it's easily top 3 in terms of the Pokemon it introduced. It might be number 2. I'd have to think about that very, very long and hard. I made a video about that a while ago, and I can't remember where I put Sinnoh, but Sinnoh has so many good Pokemon. So many good Pokemon. In my opinion, the starters are the best starters we've ever gotten. Empoleon is a god-tier design. You obviously have Garchomp, who is, like, the king of pseudo-legendary Pokemon. You've got Arceus and Dialga and Palkia and Bidoof. Like, Bidoof is literally the best Pokemon who's ever lived. You've obviously got Lucario, who's extremely popular. You have evolutions to old Pokemon that are amazing. It's just so jam-packed with so many good Pokemon. And then the region is very much like my kind of region at the same time. I definitely like the more, like I said before, I like the more mountainous type of stuff. I like the rocky, like, snowy, colder type of regions, and that's exactly what Sinnoh is. So it hits all of those bells right off the bat, and so it gets a huge leg up for me. The reason why I would have to, like, hold it back a little bit, though, is just because, and the other thing I really like before we get into the negatives, I guess, quote unquote, is I really like how they talk about mythology and like the backstory of the Pokemon world, and they build all that up. That's another fantastic thing about Sinnoh. But the reason why I think I have to kind of hold it back is because in Diamond and Pearl, those games are notoriously very slow moving, and I think just like looking back on my experience in the Sinnoh region, that had a huge part to do with why Sinnoh is the way it is for me, because those games just, even though they're really great games, they just move really slowly. And that's not talking about like the plot or anything like that. It's like the text, like, moves really slowly across the screen when someone is talking. You moving as a character is just slow in general. It just really just operates very slowly at a very slow pace, and that kind of definitely detracted from Diamond and Pearl for me. I know they fixed that in Platinum, but I never got the chance to play Platinum because it was during that era of my life where I could not get the third version because I already had basically the same game in Pokemon Pearl at the time, and yeah, my parents weren't going for that. So didn't get a chance to play that. So with the Sinnoh remakes coming up, I'm very interested to see how my perception of Sinnoh could possibly change, because obviously those will be much more polished up in that category, and so I'm interested to see what happens there. Number 3, though, and this is the region that I ultimately placed over Sinnoh that was jockeying with it for position, and that would be Galar. And the reason why I like Galar as a region so much to put it at the top 3 is because it definitely, once again, has more of my type of geography and climate, if you will. It's not necessarily a cold region, but it does have cold areas. It also has mountains. It's got a lot of scenic landscape, literally, with the wild area. And the other thing that kind of places Galar over the top is its sense of culture. It's obviously based on the UK, so it's going to have a very British, English sort of vibe, and like, it just nails it. It just nails it. Like, having like your little cottage at the beginning of the game, you live in this little village, you've got fields of Wooloo going around, like, just everywhere. I just really love the sense of culture that's in Galar. It just knocks that aspect of its region out of the park, and not that, like, Sinnoh doesn't, but, like, there isn't really as much culture present there. And it could be because of the region's design. It could be because, obviously, it was made for a older system that wasn't as powerful, so it couldn't, like, present those elements as well. I don't know. But for whatever reason, Galar just has a much better sense of culture, in my opinion. And so that's another reason why it gets that far on the list. Obviously, it does also have the wild area, as I said, which is, like, an open world area, so, like, yeah, it gets to take advantage of being, like, the most technologically advanced region that we have so far, but again, you can't, like, you try to be unbiased when you're evaluating this kind of stuff, but at the same time, you can't discount the fact that, yeah, Galar has an open world area, and that's definitely a plus for it. So it gets huge bonus points for that. And then the Pokemon in general, like the Galar Pokemon specifically, I really, really do like a lot. I don't really know where they rank in terms of all of the other regions, but there are so many really good ones. The starters are not my favorite. They could possibly be the worst starters we've ever had, in my opinion. So that's like That's not a great way to start the Pokemon section, talk about why I love the Pokemon, but, like, I wanted to get them out of the way because they're, like, some of the only, like, quote-unquote bad Pokemon, in my opinion. The Pokemon that I don't like. Basically, everything else I think is really, really cool. You've got the Pseudo-Legendary Dragapult, which is easily one of the best Pseudo-Legendaries ever. It is absolutely phenomenal. You've got, obviously, Wooloo is an instant fan favorite. You've got Yamper, who is an instant fan favorite. You've got Toxtricity, who's an instant fan favorite. You've got Appleton and Flapple, which I'm biased to Appleton, but those are really insanely creative Pokemon. You've got, you've got the Galarian fossils, which I know those are going to be very hit and miss with a lot of people, but in my opinion, just where their inspiration comes from and their origin, just dating back to like the discovery of fossils in general and how just of a mess that was, and a lot of it originated in the UK. I absolutely love that. So there are a lot of really cool Pokemon for sure in the Galar region, and and that definitely contributes as well. So between just, I think the biggest thing for me with Galar is just the feel of it, the culture, the UK vibe. That's very much my type of flavor, and so that's kind of the thing that won it out at number 3. And then number 2, I want to say between number 2 and number 1, they're basically the same. So like, it's not really so much 1 and 2 as it is 1 and 1A. It's really that close. But if we do have to rank 1 and 2, number 2, I would have the Kalos region. And Kalos is basically the same exact thing as Galar, everything I just said, just better in my opinion. I like I probably like the English vibe better than the French vibe just in general, but I just feel like Kalos, like the way it goes about displaying that culture, it just captivated me a little more within the game itself than Galar did probably. And then you've got the Pokemon as well. This is a huge leap up for Galar, or for Kalos. Not that Galar's Pokemon are bad once again, because obviously we just talked about how great they are, but in my opinion, Kalos has the best set of like new Pokemon that it introduced of any generation to this point. I think the Kalos Pokemon are phenomenal. There are very few, like, quote-unquote bad Pokemon in Kalos, and a lot of them are also, like, A+ designs by contrast, so I just think Kalos has a huge, like, step up going for it in that department. And overall, it's just a really great region. It definitely, like, I feel like it could even be better because it definitely got the short end of the stick, not getting a follow-up game like a Pokemon Z that it was definitely going to have for sure. Like, that is not a question. That is definitely a thing that was going to happen. But even still, it manages to be a phenomenal region, and it's just easily one of my favorites. And finally, getting into the number 1 spot, because we're starting to run a little long here, so probably want to go ahead and wrap this up. But number 1, it's the only one left, is the Johto region. Now, Johto, I don't know what it is about it. I will say, admittedly, it's probably some sense of nostalgia that is giving me a little bit of bias towards Johto, but I just love everything that Johto offers. I love the Pokemon themselves. The Pokemon are just all so good. So many. I mean, I know it's like an earlier generation, so there's naturally going to be a lot of iconic Pokemon, but there are just so many iconic Pokemon from Johto. Lugia, Ho-Oh, Celebi, the legendary beasts. The starters are easily some of the best we've ever had. You've got, you've got Espeon and Umbreon. You've got Tyranitar. You got Donphan and Phanpy. You got Togepi. There's just so many amazing, like, god tier Pokemon in Johto. And then Johto also has, like, it does have a lot of culture to it. It's very Japanese-esque, and so that definitely does contribute as well. I will say, however, I'm more personally biased towards, like, the English, French, like, European cultures, if you will, just as a personal taste, as opposed to the Japanese ones. But the reason why Johto still is higher than those other regions, even though that's the case, is because, like, I still appreciate all of the culture that's in Johto, regardless. Like, it's not that I hate Japanese culture, absolutely not. Obviously, like, I love Pokemon, so I love Japanese culture in a lot of ways. But the reason why Johto still stays on top is, like, the other thing it has going for it is the history. It talks a lot about the history of the Pokemon world, the history of its region, and I love history. It's one of the things that I really enjoy, so that definitely is a soft spot for me and makes me love Johto a lot. But the thing that really just kind of separates it from everything else and makes me put it as my favorite region is just, I don't know, it's one of those, it's just basically the unspeakable qualities that Johto has. It's kind of like Hoenn, where I was talking about how Everything about it just feels new and fresh and unique and different, and it just feels like a breath of fresh air for the Pokemon franchise coming off of Generation 2. It's that type of thing, but with Johto, and I can't really describe what it is in the sense that I can describe it about Hoenn, but it just has this quality about it that really resonates with me personally, and that combined with the history factor that I really like, the Pokemon that I absolutely love, the culture of it, the geography is really great too because it does have its mountains, it's basically more temperate overall and rocky, doesn't really have a lot of water going for it. And then I also really love how it is connected directly to Kanto. You can go to Kanto. I really wish more regions were, even if, excuse me, even if you couldn't go to a second region in any other given region like you can with Johto to Kanto. I just really love how Johto is like really close to Kanto and connected to it because it just creates a greater sense of interconnectivity between the regions, which I really love because it does a lot for the storytelling of the games, does a lot for the lore of the world as a whole, and so that's another reason why I really like Johto as well. So with that being said, man, my voice is about to die, so I don't know why that is the case, but we better finish before I basically can't talk at all. So yeah, with that being said, Johto is number 1, and I love it so much, but now it's time for you guys to basically tell me what you guys think. If you're listening on YouTube, leave your rankings in the comments below. Like I said, don't hate any of these regions, even Alola and Unova at the bottom of the list. There's so many things I like about them as well. So be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, wherever else, be sure to follow if you haven't. You can also hit me up on social media if you want to let me know your comments there. You can subscribe to my personal channel if you want for more Pokemon content all the time if you have not yet. Also be sure to subscribe to UCast Studios here on YouTube because I'm here every Friday and I will be here next Friday as well. So with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. We'll be back next Friday, as I said, with another great topic. And until then, as always, hope you guys have a great weekend. I love you very much, and I will smell you guys later.